I'm standing here in front of our 2022 Tesla Model 3 Long Range. This car now has 10,000 miles, and even though we just took delivery of this in June, we have put quite a few miles on this, and there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, this is a commuter car, and my wife does commute quite a bit, so we trade off and on. This thing gets on the highway quite a bit. There's been a lot of good things about this car in particular. There's also been some bad things, and the market as a whole has completely changed since we took delivery of this car, which means everything that we put into the equation to purchase this car has all changed since that time. And because the market was absolutely bonkers back then, I was able to actually sell our standard range to a wholesaler for quite a bit more than what I had paid for it. So when I did the math, it was about $100 difference to sell that to the wholesaler and then buy this from Tesla. Now there are some taxes involved as well, and I did add some options like the $2,000 paint color and the white interior for another $1,000. But this car was an amazing deal at that time. Now, unfortunately, the market has changed substantially, and this car is not worth what it was when I took delivery. I could have sold that car for about $58,000, maybe a little bit more when we took delivery of this. And again, I bought it for $50,990 plus options, fees, and taxes. Today, that value is in the low 40s at best. So that price continues to go down, and we're seeing this across the industry. Now, I want to take some time to really reflect on these last 10,000 miles, because after having the standard range Model 3, there's quite a few differences between the long range and the standard range, and I'm starting to get a better picture of, is it worth it to upgrade to the long range over that standard range? Now, at this time, it is about a $10,000 bump to go from a standard range to a long range Model 3. Is that $10,000 worth it? Well, I'm probably leaning more on the side of no, and there's a number of reasons for that. Now, traditionally I say get as much range as you can possibly afford, and I still think that's true. However, this is a second car for us. This car has not been on a road trip yet, and we've had it for 6 months. And if you follow our channel, you know we go on a lot of road trips. So that additional range and the ability to charge at a faster rate of charge, this car is not really gaining all the value it was meant for. And that included a bigger battery, being able to charge at 250 kilowatts instead of 170 cap. 358 miles of range is really not getting its true value in this car for us, although it does allow us to skip charging every day if we so desire. But that 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds is really nice. And compared to the new LFP battery pack in the standard range, it now only gets 5.8 seconds 0 to 60. So it is quite a jump. So if you're thinking about a performance but not sure if you want to spend that kind of money, then maybe the long range does make a lot of sense. Let's go over this 10,000 miles, see how it's gone, talk about the pros, talk about the cons, and some of the essentials that you really want to consider with this car. Now, we have driven 10,274 miles. We've consumed 2,553 kilowatt hours at an average of 248 watt hour per mile. Now, that 248 watt hour per mile, what that means is we are consuming a little bit north of its rated range on a daily basis on average over that 10,000 miles. I believe it's rated somewhere in the 230s for the long range all-wheel drive. So even though that's not too bad, if I recall, our standard range Model 3 was quite a bit more efficient than that. As a matter of fact, it wasn't too uncommon to get under 200 watt hour per mile with just having that rear motor and the smaller battery. Now, when I look at Tesla's charging stats in the app, I don't think these numbers are perfect, but I think they're pretty good to give you a general idea. So far, as you can see, I barely supercharging this because we haven't taken it on a road trip. So most of our charging is done at home or here locally, and with our charging rates, we have spent $395 this year, and it estimates we've saved about $844 in gas savings. Now, being realistic though, this is not just like a Toyota Camry equivalent. This thing is fast. This is a performance car, even though it's not the performance variant. This thing performs a lot more like other cars in that class. So if you looked at a car in those areas, not only would it use premium, but it would get more like 25 miles to the gallon. So there's additional savings there if you were to really look at this apples to apples with another car that performs like this. Looking over at the pros of this car, first and foremost, it's super comfortable. And this has been my impression of every Tesla that we've owned since 2020. They are extremely comfortable to sit in. So long road trips, you don't get all worn out in the seat because they're super plush. They've got the right amount of firmness, the right amount of comfort for long road trips. The AMD processor, though, is one of the shining features of this 2022 Model 3, and one of the things that is night and day difference compared to our 21 Model Y. This AMD processor is so much faster, and although that's a nice to have, there's actually some situations where it's more than just a nice to have, but actually really convenient. You see, Tesla not that long ago released an update that allowed the marker cameras on the side of the car to be activated when using the turn signal. This gives you a camera in the cab of the car to show you your blind spot on the screen, and it's pretty nice to have. It actually gives you an extra level of comfort knowing if there's somebody there or not. This is where the AMD, in my opinion, shines the most, at least from a practicality standpoint. See, when I turn the turn signal on, that camera activates almost instantly. And when you compare that to our Model Y, which has the old processor, you can see how much of a difference that is. And if you're trying to quickly change lanes and you're relying on that camera, this is a feature that's really nice to have under the AMD processor. Also, I don't want to discount the efficiency. Even though our standard range was more efficient, 248 watt-hour per mile as a whole for a commuting car is pretty good. This car on the whole is quite a bit more efficient than our Model Y of the same trim. So from an efficiency standpoint, this thing scores at the top of the pack amongst the competition. With all that packed into a much larger battery than when this thing originally launched, it gives you 358 miles of rated range. Now in real world, that's not what you're going to see, but you will see about 300 plus miles of range, really good range on this car as a whole. The suspension on this car, although I am convinced is the same suspension or very similar suspension as the Model Y, actually rides quite a bit more comfortable. I think the Model 3 standard range rode the most comfortable from a suspension standpoint. This car comes in right after that, and then the Model Y is certainly last. It is a much more harsh ride in the Model Y, but this car is somewhere in the middle. It could be a little bit more comfortable, not quite as good as the standard range, and I think it has to do with the weight. Same suspension as probably the standard range, but with more weight. So definitely a plus for this car. It is super fast, and one of my favorite things, my wife tells me all the time, it's one of her favorite things about this car as well, is just how fast this thing is. You don't have to worry about hesitation. Just press the pedal and go. You know that about Teslas at this point. So much fun to drive because it is so fast, which also gives you another benefit of handling with that huge heavy battery pack on the bottom of the car. Your center of gravity is so low, and this thing takes corners without any hesitation. The cargo space in this car is a pro and a con, but I want to talk about the pros first, because when you compare this car to a traditional gas car, you have substantially more space in this car for cargo than you would in a similar sedan. You have, of course, the frunk, which is on the smaller side, but it's additional space. But the sub-trunk in the trunk is a huge added space that you can use when looking for cargo space in this car. Visibility, of course, is great on this car like it is in the Model Y. Not many blind spots, and you do have the repeater cameras on the sides that come up on the screen, which give you additional confidence when looking around your car. The back seat can work with 3 car seats, assuming you use the right 3 car seats. Although it is tight, it can be done, and I think that that was a huge selling feature of this car back in 2018, was the fact you could actually cram in 3 very specific car seats in the back of this car. It's not going to be comfortable and it's not great, but it does work. Now over to the cons, and I do want to start with that back seat. Even though it is a pro because it can fit 3 car seats, it is super tight back there, especially compared to the Model Y. The Model Y actually gives you quite a bit more space in that second row than this Model 3 does. Many times when we're using our Teslas, we have 5 people in the car, 2 children in car seats, and 3 adults. So somebody is generally in that back row of this Model 3, and it's very, very tight in this Model 3. It actually doesn't work very well for us. On the Model Y, on the other hand, it is a lot more comfortable to get a third person back there. One of the things that I notice the most when I'm on road trips is seat height. The seat height on this Model 3 is so much lower than the Model Y. It actually sits kind of like a sports car, very low to the ground, and I generally see older people getting in and out of these superchargers and struggling. In addition, because of the size of this car, the roof line is actually smaller, meaning that door space is smaller as well. So the headroom getting in and out is tighter as well. Something to really think about if you are older or if you have any joint issues. Getting in and out of this car can sometimes be uncomfortable depending on your situation. One of the things that I noticed right off the bat with our standard range Model 3 was it seemed a bit quieter than our Model Y, and this is no exception. However, there is a wind noise that I've had in this one and the standard range that I do not have in the Model Y, which seems counterintuitive given the Model Y sits higher and hits more wind. This car actually has quite a bit of wind noise on the top of the car. The road noise is very good. It's not too loud. You don't hear the tires rolling down the road too much. You don't hear all the traffic around you all that bad. But that wind noise, as you start to increase your speed, you definitely start to notice it in the cab of the car. There is one other thing about this car that originally I thought was specific for cold climates. As we came from Indiana, I knew firsthand you need mud flaps. Now that I'm down here in Florida, I'm finding out that this Model 3, we don't have mud flaps on it. And if you look, I am really glad I have PPF because the rocker panel is completely covered in debris, and it doesn't matter how many times I wash, this happens every trip. So this car is getting a lot of abuse in the areas behind the wheel wells. Something to really think about. Make sure you get some mud flaps on this car regardless of where you live. And I'm going to wrap the cons up with probably the biggest con, and it is not Model 3 specific. Not everybody's gonna love that I'm saying this, but vision only is terrible in this car. I don't care what anybody says. On a day-to-day basis, I use full self-driving beta on our Model Y, or I use basic autopilot, which is what we have on this Model 3. Vision only is terrible. Not only do we get forward collision warnings, but this car phantom brakes all the time. It is super annoying, it's very jarring, and whenever I have passengers in the car, they prefer I don't use autopilot, even basic autopilot. And it's unfortunate. Tesla made this decision back in 21 to remove the radar in the front of the car. I'm not saying phantom braking didn't happen when the radar was there, but I am saying that vision only is not ready for prime time yet. It's been rolling out in every car since then. And to further their agenda of cutting parts out of the car, they've also removed the ultrasonic sensors, which fortunately we do have. Those ultrasonic sensors are super useful if you park in the garage because it gives you a much more accurate pinpoint position of where your car is in comparison to the wall or any other obstacles that you park up next to. It also is a good indicator of where exactly I want to park to be able to clear the garage door in the back. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about this. Tesla has gone all in on vision only, and I can get behind the idea that this will be there someday, but it's just not there today. And unfortunately, this is what's being rolled out. This is what we have to work with, and it is unfortunate because it really isn't ready. So with all of that, what are my overall thoughts? Here's what I think right now. This car is off menu, and you can get one, but you have to get it out of inventory from Tesla. You cannot custom order this car today. Assuming the standard range Model 3 stays right where it's at price-wise, is it worth the upgrade to the long range from the standard range? I think that the answer is yes and no. Yes, if this is your first. Yes, if this is your only EV. I think having that additional range is a nice to have, especially if you're in a colder climate because the hit is so big with that cold weather. If you go on road trips frequently, yes, it is worth it. You'll have faster charging and you'll be able to travel much farther between chargers. If this is a daily commuter for around town and you have the ability to plug it in at home every night, it's probably not worth it. I think the standard range provides you all the features that you have in this, except the stereo is not quite as good, but it's still very good. But you still have most of the same features that this car has. You just have a smaller battery pack. You have rear-wheel drive instead of all-wheel drive, but the car on the whole is still very much the same, and it is a great value, especially now when you look at the used market and you can start to get standard range Model 3s almost sub $30,000. There's some really good deals to be had. So even if you're looking at new, a standard range is going to be the perfect car for a lot of people. And for the long range, it really depends on what your budget is and what you're planning to do with the car. There's another situation where the long range would be worth it, and that is if you're considering the performance, but don't quite want to spend that much for the performance. Get the long range, spend the $2,000 to reduce your 0 to 60 by half a second, and be happy with the long range. With all of that said, there is no other car I would rather have than a Tesla today. Because the public charging infrastructure is not good, Tesla right now continues to be the best option for anybody considering an EV. Now, if you're going to use it as a daily, of course, those other options might make more sense for you, but I personally would not rather have another car than this Model 3 as our second electric car. When we took delivery of this car, there were a few things that we did right off the bat, and I highly suggest them. We wrapped this car in PPF. PPF, doing it yourself, can save you thousands of dollars, and it's definitely worth checking out if you're up to the task. You can check out our videos on how to do that. Of course, you can check out Drive Protected's YouTube as well, where he has even more detailed videos than we do. And you can get 20% off by using code BTG20. As you've probably noticed, something doesn't look right in the background of this being a long range, and it's the wheel covers. These wheel covers are awesome. I love them. These things look exactly like the performance wheels, and they're a little bit taller than the standard aero covers that go on the car, so they cover all the way up above the tire just a bit to hide the wheel underneath. These things were pretty affordable as well. I do have a link in the description for you to get yourself a set of these. Definitely worth it if you don't want to break the bank, but still want a better look than the standard aero covers. So there you have it. Overall, this has been a fantastic car. I'm still very satisfied with it. Obviously, I'm not satisfied with what's happened to the used car market, but that is out of my control. There's not much I can really do about that. If you're considering a Tesla Model 3, there is no question Tesla continues to reign supreme, and there's a number of reasons for that. The car is super easy and intuitive to use, and it comes with Tesla's supercharging network, which cannot be touched by anybody else at this point. Although there is some room for improvement, including autopilot, which has, in my opinion, gone downhill, that will come with time. And unfortunately, there's not much that can be done in the short term to address that. But overall, there's a reason why the Tesla Model 3 and the Model Y continue to outsell all other electric cars here in the United States. They continue to set records globally as well, and there are some very good reasons for that. I do hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, of course, give it the thumbs up. If you haven't already, of course, subscribe to the channel as we continue to post content regularly. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram @BeardedTesla. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.